Hello, this is simply about networking protocols, and today we are talking about switching and bridging. Specification that describes all details of this protocol and networking feature is IEEE 802. Current version is from 2001. General concept. Switching bridging. This is transmission of the Ethernet frame without internal processing or modification through the device within VLAN from one port to another port. When we receive Ethernet frame with destination MAC A, source MAC F in VLAN 1, we need to process it using FDB, select to which port we should transmit it, and transmit from this port. FDB, this is database that contains information about directions toward which packets with specific destination MACs should be sent. In other words, entry in FDB literally says that system knows that for it MAC A in VLAN 1 is behind port 2. It means that device with MAC A, identified by MAC A, is behind port 2 when transmission happens using VLAN 1. FDB key is MAC plus VLAN, because if you remember from VLAN video, VLAN we can imagine as a slice of the device that contains on all ports that are members of this VLAN, and only between those ports data traffic can be transmitted. Switching contains several stages. Stage 1, learning process. When packet in with destination MAC, source MAC in some specific VLAN received, it imaginally gets to the specific VLAN for processing and to select ports where it can be transmitted from. But also we send into FDB message saying, note that source MAC F, it means we have device identified by MAC F behind port 3 in VLAN 1. And this entry is added into FDB. MAC F in VLAN 1 is behind port 3. Then we asking forwarding database about do we know where to send packet with destination MAC A in VLAN 1. In our case, yes, we have an entry for MAC A in VLAN 1, and we're saying that this device is behind port 2. So we're transmitting packet and sending it from port 2 in VLAN 1. This is forwarding. That's simple. Sometimes it could be that there is no entry in FDB for some specific MAC plus VLAN, and then another operation happens, it called flooding. For flooding, when we receive a Ethernet frame with destination MAC, for example O, and some source MAC F in VLAN 10, same stages happens. First, learning. We need to learn that MAC F in VLAN 10 is behind port 5. Notifying FDB, FDB adding specific entry into it. Then we are asking, is there entry in FDB for MAC O? Do we know where to send a packet with MAC O in VLAN 10? In our FDB, there is no entry for MAC O in VLAN 10. What happens? If flooding is forbidden, disabled, nothing happens. Packet is dropped. There is no destination. We're not sending it. If flooding is allowed, we are multiplying the packet and sending it from all ports in the VLAN except one we received it on. Because eventually, if destination would be somewhere behind this port, this packet shouldn't be reach us. So flooding is when we don't have an entry in FDB for a specific MAC plus VLAN, then we're sending a packet from all ports in this VLAN except ingress port. And FDB has one more important functionality called migration. For example, in our case, we have an entry for MACJ in VLAN 100 saying that this device, this MAC, is behind port 9. We don't know and shouldn't know how big network is behind port 9, what happens there, and what is the status of this network. This network could change for any reason. There are multiple protocols that change in topology of the network, like spanning tree, stuff like that. For example, some ports can go down, go up, reconfiguration, anything else. For any reason, network behind port 9 can change, and now device with MACJ is behind our port, behind another our port. What happens in this case? So we're receiving a frame in VLAN 100 with source MAC J on port 7, and learning procedure requires to send a notification to the FDB that in VLAN 100 MAC J is behind port 7. Old entry that says that we had for MAC J and VLAN 100 is removed. New one is added. This is so-called migration. Then, if we have an entry for the destination MACD in VLAN 100, it forwarded. If not, and flooding is allowed, it's flooded. If flooding is disabled, it's dropped. And there is one more functionality related to the FDB that you should be aware of. This is so-called static dynamic behavior. Entries in the FDB can be added by two separate streams. One is by learning procedure, automatically by the system. That will be so-called dynamic entry. Or manually by administrator. That could be static or dynamic. What's the difference? Dynamic entry has a timeout. This entry expires if during some period of time there is no traffic that uses this MAC address. Why do we need it? Because forwarding database is limited by its size. Every device has unique MAC address. In case we have pretty big network, there will be lots of entries for each VLAN. Each MAC should be added as a separate entry, because again, all VLANs are isolated. Every VLAN is a separate slice. They don't know about each other in this functionality. So what happens after learning, timer is enabled. If there is no activity for entry with MAC plus VLAN during the specific timeout, everything is described in specification. You should read it for more details. But If there is no activity during this timeout, entry expired, remove from FDB, and we are ready to add additional entry again. That's simple. Thank you. Watch all following videos.